The boardroom went silent as Cassandra Mitchell signed the final acquisition papers. Across the table, her ex-husband's face drained of color as he realized the truth. The mysterious investor who just bought his company was the wife he'd thrown away 3 years ago. But I need to take you back to where this really started. Back to a night that looked perfect on the surface, in a penthouse overlooking the city, where Cassandra thought she had everything figured out. Because what happened in the next 60 seconds would destroy her world and eventually build her an empire. Cassandra had always been the invisible wife, not because Nathan Rivera didn't acknowledge her existence, but because she'd made herself small enough to fit into his world. For 5 years, she'd played the role perfectly. The supportive spouse who attended charity galas in elegant silence, who smiled through business dinners, who never complained when he worked 16-hour days. That Thursday evening, she'd come home early from visiting her sister, carrying takeout from Nathan's favorite restaurant. Their anniversary was next week, and she'd been planning something special. Maybe finally tell him about the business degree she'd been completing in secret. She'd wanted to surprise him, to show him she could be more than just the woman who organized his social calendar. The penthouse was supposed to be empty. Nathan had texted her 2 hours earlier, saying he'd be at the office until midnight. But as she stepped through the door, she heard voices drifting from his study. Laughter. The kind of intimate, breathy laughter that made her stomach drop. She should have announced herself, should have called out. Instead, Cassandra found herself frozen in the hallway, the paper bag crinkling softly in her trembling hands as she heard her husband's voice say words she'd been waiting 5 years to hear. "I love you. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Her heart stopped. For one beautiful, foolish second, she thought maybe he was on the phone with his mother or rehearsing something for their anniversary. Then she heard the woman's voice, young, confident, dripping with satisfaction. "So when are you going to tell her?" Cassandra's found her hand the doorframe, steadying herself, as Nathan responded. "After the Singapore deal closes, I can't afford the distraction right now. Besides, Cassandra won't make it difficult. She never does." The casual cruelty of it hit harder than any slap. She never does. As if her compliance, her understanding, her endless patience had been nothing but weakness he'd learned to exploit. "And then we can finally be together, publicly?" the woman pressed. "Then I'll give you the proposal you deserve, Leela. Not some rushed city hall wedding like..." He trailed off, but Cassandra heard the disdain in what he didn't say. "Like the one I gave my current wife. The one she'd convinced herself was romantic in its simplicity." Her vision blurred. She looked down at the takeout bag. His favorite Thai curry, extra spicy, the way he liked it. And something inside her crystallized. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clearer. She set the bag down silently on the hallway table and walked back out of the penthouse. Left her keys on the entry console, took nothing but her purse and the dignity Nathan hadn't managed to strip away yet. By the time she reached the elevator, her hands had stopped shaking. By the time she reached the lobby, she'd made her first decision. She wasn't going to cry. Not yet. Not where anyone could see. The next morning, Cassandra did something she'd never done in 5 years of marriage. She didn't answer Nathan's calls. There were 7 of them before noon. 12 text messages ranging from, "Where are you?" to, "This isn't funny, Cassandra," to, "I have the Peterson dinner tonight and I need you there." She sat in her sister's Julia's cramped studio apartment, the one Nathan had always wrinkled his nose at. and stared at her phone like it was a bomb waiting to detonate. Julia, brilliant and fierce in ways Cassandra had forgotten she could be, paced the small space with barely contained fury. "Tell me you're not going back to him," Julia said, her voice sharp. "Tell me you finally see what I've been seeing for 5 years." Cassandra thought about Nathan's face when he'd married her. He'd seemed genuinely happy then, hadn't he? Or had she just been so desperate to believe in the fairy tale, small-town girl marry successful businessman, that she'd missed all the signs? The way he'd isolated her from her friends, the way he discouraged her from working, saying his wife didn't need to. The way he'd slowly, systematically convinced her that her worth was measured by how well she supported his ambitions. "I heard him planning to propose to her," Cassandra whispered, "to give her everything he never gave me. And the worst part, he talked about me like I was an inconvenience, a problem to manage after his business deal closes." Julian knelt in front of her, gripping her hands. "Then you know what you need to do." But Cassandra didn't. Not yet. Because walking away meant facing the terrifying truth. She had no career, no income, no identity outside of being Mrs. Nathan Rivera. She'd given up her job as a junior analyst 5 years ago because he'd convinced her his success was their success. She'd put her MBA dreams on hold. She'd made herself dispensable. That afternoon, Nathan finally showed up at Julia's door. Cassandra watched through the peer hole as he stood there in his $1,000 suit, running his hand through his hair with practiced frustration. He looked concerned. He looked like a husband who cared. "Cassandra, please, whatever this is about, we can talk about it." His voice carried through the door, as smooth as expensive whiskey. "You're my wife. You belong at home, not hiding in your sister's apartment like a child." Something about those words, "you belong at home," made Cassandra's decision for her. She didn't open the door. She simply texted him 4 words. "I want a divorce." Her phone exploded with calls immediately. She turned it off. And for the first time in 5 years, Cassandra slept through the night without waiting for Nathan to come home. If you can't stand people who treat their partners like accessories instead of equals, let me know in the comments. Type, "Nobody deserves that." Because what Nathan did next showed exactly who he really was. The divorce should have been simple. They had a prenuptial agreement. Nathan had insisted on it, and 23-year-old Cassandra had signed it thinking it proved she loved him for himself, not his money. The agreement was brutal. In the event of divorce, she'd leave with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage, which was basically nothing. Cassandra told her lawyer she'd sign. She didn't want Nathan's money. She wanted her life back. But Nathan, it turned out, wasn't interested in a quick divorce anymore, because a divorce meant explaining to his business partners, his parents, his carefully curated social circle, why his marriage had fallen apart right before the biggest deal of his career. So he launched a campaign to bring her back. Flowers arrived at Julia's apartment daily, expensive gifts, handwritten notes that said things like, "I miss you," and "We can work through this." He showed up at the coffee shop where she'd started working. Yes, working. Taking orders and making lattes because she needed money and refused to touch the joint account. "You're embarrassing yourself," he'd said, his voice low and tight as he watched her wipe down tables in an apron. "Embarrassing me. Is this what you want? To prove some point?" Cassandra had looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Or maybe she was finally seeing him clearly for the first time. "I want you to sign the divorce papers, Nathan. I made a mistake," and his voice actually cracked with what might have been genuine emotion. It wasn't real. You're my wife. Come home and we'll forget this ever happened. But Cassandra had spent the past 3 weeks thinking, really thinking about who she'd been before Nathan, about the dreams she'd buried, about the business degree she'd been secretly completing, attending night classes Nathan never knew about because he'd never asked what she did with her days. No, she'd said simply. And the look on his face, shock, then anger, then something darker, told her everything she needed to know about what her refusal really meant to him. He'd leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. You'll regret this, Cassandra. You're nothing without me. You'll end up exactly where you started, nowhere. That night, Cassandra completed her final MBA assignment. It was on hostile corporate takeovers. She got an A+. 3 months later, Nathan finally signed the papers. Not because he'd given up, but because Leela was pregnant. Suddenly, a divorce wasn't just convenient, it was necessary. He needed to marry her before she started showing, needed to present the right image to his conservative board members. The settlement was exactly as brutal as the prenup had promised. Cassandra walked away with $50,000, her contribution to the marriage, Nathan's lawyer had called it, with barely concealed contempt. 5 years of her life, valued at $10,000 per year? Julia had cried. Cassandra hadn't. She'd taken that $50,000 and made a decision that would change everything. She remembered something her economics professor had said during one of those night classes. The best revenge is outrageous success. Cassandra enrolled in an intensive coding boot camp, spent 16 hours a day learning programming, data analysis, artificial intelligence. She worked the coffee shop in the mornings, studied until midnight, slept 5 hours, and repeated. Her hands developed calluses from typing, her eyes burned from screen strain. But for the first time in years, she felt alive. She also did something else, something Nathan would never have expected, because he'd never paid attention to what she actually did during their marriage. All those charity galas she had attended, she'd been building a network. All those business dinners where she'd sat quietly, she'd been listening, learning, understanding exactly how Nathan's world worked. One of those contacts was Thomas Chen, a venture capitalist who'd always been kind to her at events. She reached out to him with a business proposal. It was risky. It was audacious. It used everything she'd learned in her MBA and everything she'd observed during her marriage. She wanted to build an AI platform that would revolutionize supply chain management, the exact sector Nathan's company operated in. She had insights from years of listening to his problems, watching his mistakes, understanding his weaknesses. Thomas met her for coffee. He looked at her proposal for exactly 7 minutes. Then he looked up and smiled. When Nathan Rivera realizes what he lost, it's going to destroy him. I'm in. How much do you need? But here's what Cassandra didn't know yet. Nathan's company was already in trouble. That Singapore deal, it had fallen through. The business was hemorrhaging money, and in exactly 2 years, he'd be desperate enough to accept an acquisition offer from a mysterious investment group he'd never heard of. A group Cassandra was about to create. Year 1 was brutal. Cassandra launched Titan AI with Thomas's initial investment and 3 developers she'd met at the boot camp. They worked out of a cramped co-working space that smelled like instant ramen and ambition. She coded alongside her team, led client pitches, handled operations, and somehow still found time to study her competitors obsessively. Especially one competitor, Nathan's company, Rivercorp. She told herself it was just business intelligence. She told herself she wasn't obsessed. But late at night, when she analyzed River Corp's quarterly reports, she couldn't help feeling a surge of satisfaction at every declining number, every missed projection, every hint of trouble. Nathan had married Leela in a ceremony that made the society pages. Cassandra had seen the photos, couldn't help herself, and felt nothing but a distant curiosity. Leela was beautiful, sophisticated, exactly the kind of trophy wife Nathan had probably always wanted. In the wedding photo, his smile looked strained. Good. Titan AI's breakthrough came 11 months in. A mid-sized logistics company took a chance on their platform, and within 3 months, they'd increased efficiency by 34%. The testimonial led to 3 more clients, then 10, then 20. Cassandra barely slept. She lived in her tiny apartment, ate takeout at her desk, and poured every dollar back into the company. Thomas kept offering to increase her salary, but she refused. She'd say, "Pay the team. I don't need much." What she needed was to prove Nathan wrong. Every single day, that was what drove her. His voice in her head, "You're nothing without me." She'd show him what nothing looked like. By year 2, Titan AI had 50 employees and revenue in the millions. Cassandra moved into a modest house, nothing like the penthouse, but it was hers. She started getting invited to industry conferences, tech panels, networking events. People stopped introducing her as Nathan Rivera's ex-wife and started calling her by her own title, CEO. And that's when she started hearing the rumors about River Corp, late payments to vendors, high executive turnover, a major client lost to a competitor. Nathan's empire was cracking. Julia had asked her once, during a rare sister dinner, "Are you building this company to compete with him or to destroy him?" Cassandra had taken a long sip of wine before answering. "Does it matter?" "Yes," Julia had said softly, "because one of those things will satisfy you. The other will consume you." But Cassandra was already consumed. She'd spent 3 years building herself back up from nothing, and she wasn't going to stop now. Not when she was so close to showing Nathan exactly what he'd thrown away. If you believe success is the best revenge, hit that subscribe button. People like Nathan won't, and you need to hear what Cassandra discovered next. Year 3 changed everything. Titan AI went from successful startup to industry disruptor. They developed a proprietary algorithm that could predict supply chain disruptions with 92% accuracy. Fortune 500 companies came calling. Cassandra's face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "The CEO Who Rebuilt Herself" and "From Housewife to Tech Titan." She never mentioned Nathan in interviews, never said, "my ex-husband," or gave him the satisfaction of being a part of her story. But anyone who knew their history could read between the lines. That's when Thomas came to her with the proposal. "River Corp is drowning," he'd said, sliding a confidential report across her desk. "They're looking for a buyer or investor. Quietly. They don't want the market to know how desperate they are." Cassandra stared at the numbers, her heart pounding. River Corp, Nathan's legacy, his pride, his identity, was vulnerable. One strategic acquisition and she could own it all. "There's something you should know," Thomas had continued carefully. "Nathan reached out to me last week. He doesn't know about our connection. He asked if I knew any investors who might be interested in buying a stake in his company." The irony was delicious. Nathan was unknowingly asking her backer for a lifeline. "What did you tell him?" Cassandra had asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I told him I'd ask around. Cassandra, this is your call, but if you do this, there's no going back. You'll own his company. You'll be his boss. Is that what you want?" Cassandra thought about Nathan's face the last time she'd seen him in the coffee shop, telling her she was nothing. She thought about the proposal she'd overheard him planning for Lila while she'd stood in the hallway holding his favorite takeout. She thought about 5 years of making herself small. "Set up a meeting," she'd said, "but use a shell corporation. I don't want him to know it's me until I'm sitting across the table from him." The next 2 months were a chess game. Cassandra's investment group, cleverly named Apex Holdings, untraceable to her, made an offer. Nathan negotiated. She countered. He was desperate, but trying not to show it. She had all the power, but played it carefully. Finally, they reached terms. Apex Holdings would acquire 68% of Rivercorp, giving Cassandra majority control. Nathan would remain as president, but answer to the new board. The deal would close in 6 weeks, with one condition. Nathan had to meet with the lead investor to finalize terms. That's when Cassandra made her mistake. She'd been so focused on the acquisition, so consumed with the logistics and the victory, that she'd forgotten to ask herself Julia's question: what happens after you win? Because revenge, she was about to learn, doesn't feel the way you think it will. The day of the meeting arrived with a thunderstorm that seemed almost too dramatic to be real. Cassandra stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the color of her slate gray suit. She'd chosen it carefully, powerful but not aggressive, expensive but not ostentatious. She wanted Nathan to see exactly what she'd become. Her hands shook slightly as she fastened her watch. 3 years. 3 years of building herself back up, of proving him wrong, of creating something extraordinary. And now she was about to walk into that boardroom and watch his face crumble when he realized the truth. So why did she feel hollow instead of triumphant? The River Court building was smaller than she remembered, or maybe she was just bigger now. She walked through the lobby with her lawyer and Thomas, her heels clicking against marble that Nathan had once told her cost $300 per square foot. She'd pretended to be impressed then. Now she owned buildings with lobbies twice as grand. The receptionist directed them to the executive conference room on the 20th floor. As the elevator climbed, Thomas leaned in and whispered, "Last chance to back out." Cassandra shook her head. She'd come too far to turn back now. The conference room doors opened, and there he was, Nathan Rivera, standing by the window, looking out at the city. He'd aged. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, gray threading through his hair at the temples. He turned as they entered, his practiced business smile in place. "Mr. Chen, good to see you again," Nathan said, shaking Thomas's hand. Then his eyes moved to Cassandra, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Confusion flickered across his face, recognition, then denial. "And you are?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral even as his face paled. Cassandra stepped forward, her voice steady as steel. "The lead investor." "Hello, Nathan." The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Nathan's lawyer looked confused. Thomas watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Nathan just stared, his mouth opening and closing like he'd forgotten how to form words. Cassandra, he finally managed, and the shock in his voice gave her a surge of satisfaction that felt like lightning in her veins. What? What is this? This is a business meeting, she said calmly, moving to the head of the conference table and sitting down like she owned it, because she was about to. Shall we discuss the terms of the acquisition? Nathan's hands gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. Your Apex Holdings? You're the investor? Among other things. I'm also the founder and CEO of Titan AI, your largest competitor, but I'm sure you've been too busy to notice. She opened her folder, pulling out the contract with movements that were deliberately casual. Now, as we discussed through our lawyers, Apex Holdings is acquiring a 68% stake in River Corp. You'll remain as president, reporting directly to me as chair of the board. The meeting should have been her moment of triumph. Nathan signed the papers because he had no choice. Cassandra held all the cards, and they both knew it. His company was drowning, and she was the only lifeline desperate enough to throw him. But as she watched him sign his empire over to her, Cassandra felt something unexpected. Emptiness. The victory tasted like ashes. Nathan left without another word, his face carved from stone. His lawyer gathered papers with hands that shook slightly, avoiding Cassandra's eyes. Thomas clapped her on the shoulder, murmuring congratulations. But all Cassandra could think about was the look on Nathan's face when he'd asked, why? The weeks that followed were strange. Cassandra installed herself as chair of River Corp's board, began implementing changes, started restructuring the company. She was good at this, brilliant even. Within a month, she'd identified the problems Nathan had been too proud or too stubborn to fix. Within 2, she'd stopped the bleeding and set the company on a path to recovery. Nathan showed up for work every day, professional and cold. They spoke only about business, their conversations clipped and formal. Cassandra told herself that this was what she wanted, this distance, this power, this proof that she'd won. But at night, alone in her house, she'd find herself thinking about the man she'd married. Not the Nathan who'd betrayed her, but the one from before. Had that person ever really existed? Or had she invented him, projected her dreams onto someone who had never been capable of being what she needed? One evening, 6 weeks into her chairmanship, Cassandra was working late at River Corp. Yes, working late at her ex-husband's company. The irony wasn't lost on her. When Nathan knocked on her office door. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. And his voice was different, stripped of armor, almost vulnerable. She gestured to a chair, wary. Nathan sat down heavily, and in the lamplight, he looked exhausted. "The restructuring plan you implemented, it's working. We signed 2 new clients this week. The board is thrilled." "That's what you came to tell me?" Cassandra asked, confused. "No." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I came to tell you that you were right about everything. I treated you like an accessory, like you existed to make my life easier. And when you stopped being convenient, I threw you away like you never mattered." Cassandra's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because Leela left me," Nathan said, and laughed bitterly. 2 months ago, she said living with me was like living with a ghost, that I was obsessed with work, never present, treated her like she was there to look pretty and shut up. Sound familiar? The satisfaction Cassandra had expected to feel at this news never came. Instead, she just felt tired. "Nathan," he interrupted, "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I finally understand what I lost. Not just a wife, not just someone to make me look good at business dinners. I lost my partner, the only person who actually saw me and loved me anyway." His voice cracked, and I threw that away for someone who only wanted the image of who she thought I was. Cassandra stood up, walked to the window. The city sparkled below them, full of lights and possibilities. She said quietly, "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even hearing you plan to propose to her. It was when you said, 'Cassandra won't make it difficult. She never does.' Like my kindness, my patience, my understanding, like all of that was weakness you'd learned to exploit." "It was never weakness," Nathan said, standing now too. "It was strength I was stupid enough to recognize." They stood there in silence, the weight of 3 years and a destroyed marriage hanging between them. Cassandra thought about justice and revenge and all the things she told herself she wanted, and she realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped wanting to hurt him and started wanting to prove, to herself, to the world, that she was more than his discarded wife. She'd done that. She'd built an empire, she'd taken control of his company, not just to punish him, but to save it. Because despite everything, she couldn't watch something fail when she knew how to fix it. "I don't forgive you," Cassandra said finally. "I don't know if I ever will." "I don't expect you to," Nathan replied. "I just needed you to know that you were right, and I'm sorry for all of it." Over the next 6 months, something unexpected happened. Working together to save River Corp, Cassandra and Nathan developed a careful, professional relationship that was nothing like their marriage had been. They challenged each other in meetings, argued about strategy, pushed each other to be better. And slowly, Cassandra saw glimpses of someone she'd never really known. The real Nathan, stripped of arrogance and pretense. He'd been humbled by loss, not just of his company, but of his marriage to Leela, his reputation, his certainty that he was always the smartest person in the room. One night, after a particularly brutal board meeting where they had to defend their recovery plan to skeptical investors, Nathan had looked at her across the empty conference table and said, "You would have been incredible at this if I'd ever let you be part of the business during our marriage." "I know," Cassandra had said simply, and they'd both laughed, because what else could you do with regrets that couldn't be changed? But here's what made everything complicated. Cassandra was starting to enjoy working with him. She respected his instincts, his work ethic, the way he'd swallowed his pride and actually listened to her ideas. This Nathan, older, humbler, broken open by consequences, was more interesting than the polished, arrogant man she'd married. And Nathan wasn't hiding his feelings. He didn't grovel or beg, but in 100 small ways, he showed her that he saw her now, really saw her. He asked about her ideas, credited her openly in meetings, defended her decisions to the board. When she worked late, he'd bring her coffee the way she liked it, something he'd never managed to remember during their entire marriage. Julia, during their sister dinners, had pointed at Cassandra with a chopstick and said, "Please tell me you're not falling for him again." "I'm not," Cassandra had insisted. "We're just colleagues, business partners." "You're playing with fire," Julia had warned. "That man broke your heart once. Don't give him the chance to do it again." But Cassandra couldn't help wondering, what if the man who'd broke her heart was different from the man sitting across the conference table from her now? What if people could actually change? What if forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, but about acknowledging growth? The moment she realized she was in trouble came 9 months into her chairmanship. River Corp had just landed its biggest contract in 5 years, a deal Cassandra and Nathan had worked on together for 3 months. After the client left, Nathan had pulled her into a spontaneous hug, laughing with pure joy. And for just a second, held against his chest, feeling his heartbeat and his genuine happiness, Cassandra had felt something she'd thought was dead. Hope. She'd pulled away quickly, professional mask slamming back into place, but Nathan had seen it. She knew he'd seen it, and the look on his face, tender, careful, yearning, had terrified her more than anything had in 3 years. Comment, trust is earned if you're Team Cassandra. The past can't be erased. Now watch what happens when she has to make an impossible choice. The choice came in the form of an offer Cassandra couldn't have imagined a year ago. A Silicon Valley giant wanted to acquire Titan AI for $200 million. $200 million. Her company, her legacy, her proof that she was more than Nathan Rivera's ex-wife. Someone wanted to buy it for a fortune. There was just one complication. The acquiring company wanted Cassandra to stay on as Chief Innovation Officer, leading their AI division. In California, 3,000 miles away from Rivercorp, from the life she'd built, from Nathan. Thomas had called her with the offer on a Tuesday afternoon. This is it, Cassandra. This is everything you worked for. Financial security for life, a position at one of the most influential tech companies in the world. You'd be walking away from Nathan in Rivercorp, but you'd be walking towards something extraordinary. Cassandra had sat in her office, not at Rivercorp, but at Titan AI sleek headquarters, and thought about what she wanted, really wanted. Not revenge, not validation, not even justice anymore. Just what would make her happy? That evening, she asked Nathan to meet her for coffee. Not at Rivercorp, not at a restaurant where people might see them. At the same coffee shop where she'd worked 3 years ago, wiping tables while he told her she was nothing. He'd arrived in jeans and a sweater, not the suit armor he usually wore. He looked younger this way, more like the man she'd fallen in love with at 23 before everything got complicated. "I have something to tell you," Cassandra said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I got an acquisition offer for Titan AI. $200 million. Nathan's eyes widened. "Cassandra, that's incredible. Congratulations. They want me to move to California, lead their AI division." Something flickered across his face. Pain, quickly hidden. "Of course they do. You're brilliant. They'd be lucky to have you." "It would mean leaving Rivercorp, selling my shares, walking away from everything here." "Is that what you want?" Nathan answered carefully. Cassandra studied his face. This man who'd hurt her so badly and somehow, impossibly, grown into someone she could respect. "I don't know. 3 years ago, I would have taken this offer without thinking twice. It's everything I built Titan AI for. Proof that I'm more than your ex-wife, that I'm successful on my own terms." "You've already proved that," Nathan said quietly. "You proved it the day you walked out of our penthouse with nothing but your dignity. Everything since then has just been the world catching up to what you already knew." "Then why am I hesitating?" Nathan reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. "Maybe because revenge doesn't feel as good as you thought it would. Maybe because you've spent 3 years building something here. Not just companies, but a life. Friends. Roots." He paused. "Maybe because despite everything I did to you, despite every reason you have to hate me, there's still something here worth staying for." Cassandra's breath caught. "Nathan, I'm not asking you to stay for me," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that. I'm just asking you to make sure you're leaving for the right reasons. If California is your dream, then go. Chase it. But if you're leaving just to prove you can walk away, just to show me you don't need anything here," his voice dropped, then you're still letting our past control your future. And there it was, the truth she'd been avoiding for months. She'd been so focused on proving Nathan wrong, on showing him what he'd lost, that she'd forgotten to ask herself what she actually wanted. Cassandra took 2 weeks to decide. She visited California, toured the headquarters, met with executives who practically worshipped her. She imagined her life there, brilliant, successful, far away from messy emotions and complicated history. She also spent time at Rivercorp, watching what she and Nathan had built together. The company was thriving now, growing in ways it never had under his sole leadership. The employees respected her. The board trusted her. She'd created something meaningful here. On a Saturday afternoon, she found Nathan in his office, working on a proposal. He looked up when she knocked, and his entire face lit up before he could hide it. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi." Cassandra sat down across from him. "I made my decision about the California offer." She watched him brace himself, his jaw tightening. "And I'm staying," Cassandra said. "I'm turning down the acquisition, keeping Titan AI independent, and maintaining my role as chair of Rivercorp." Nathan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 2 weeks. That's great for the company, for both companies." "I'm not staying because of you," Cassandra said, needing him to understand. "I'm staying because I built something here that matters. Because I'm not going to let our past, good or bad, dictate my future. Because I like my life here, messy and complicated as it is." "I understand," Nathan said, though his eyes said he hoped for more. Cassandra stood up, moved to the window. The sun was setting, painting the city in gold and amber. "But I am willing to have dinner with you, as I don't know what. Not as colleagues, not as business partners, just as two people who have a complicated history and might want to see if there's a future." She heard Nathan stand, felt him move closer but not too close. "I would like that, very much. But Cassandra, I need you to know I'm not the man you married. That person was arrogant and blind and stupid. I've spent 3 years learning how to be better. If you give me a chance, I won't waste it." Cassandra turned to face him. "And I'm not the woman you married either. I'm not going to make myself small to fit into your life. I'm not going to be silent or accommodating or easy. I have my own empire, my own ambitions, my own voice. If we do this, whatever this becomes, it's as equals or it's nothing." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Nathan said, and the honesty in his voice made her believe him. They stood there in the fading light, two people who destroyed each other and somehow built themselves back up. Cassandra didn't know what would happen next. Maybe they'd have dinner and realize the past was too heavy to overcome. Maybe they'd build something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. Maybe they'd just become friends, partners in business, if not in life. But for the first time in 3 years, Cassandra wasn't driven by the need to prove anything. She'd already proved it. To Nathan, to the world, to herself. She was successful, powerful, complete on her own. Whatever happened next would be a choice, not a reaction. Growth, not revenge. Saturday night? Nathan asked tentatively. "There's a new restaurant downtown, unless that's too formal. We could just get coffee? Or—" "Saturday night sounds perfect," Cassandra interrupted, allowing herself a small smile. "But, Nathan, if you're even 5 minutes late, I'm leaving." He laughed, really laughed, and it was a sound she'd forgotten he could make. "I'll be early." As Cassandra left his office, she pulled out her phone and called Julia. "I have something to tell you, and you're not going to like it." Julia groaned. "You're giving him another chance." No, Cassandra corrected. I'm giving myself a chance to decide what I want without anger or hurt or the need for revenge clouding my judgment. He might be part of that future, he might not, but it's going to be my choice, made for the right reasons. There was a long pause. Then Julia said, "You know what? That's actually pretty healthy. Character growth. I'm proud of you." "Don't be too proud yet. I might still destroy him if he screws this up." That's my girl. Saturday night arrived with the kind of nervous energy Cassandra hadn't felt since she was 23 and going on her first date with Nathan Rivera. Except, this time she wasn't a girl trying to impress a successful businessman. She was a woman who'd built her own empire, who knew her worth, who was choosing to give someone a chance, not because she needed him, but because she wanted to see what could happen. Nathan was 10 minutes early, waiting outside the restaurant in a simple suit, holding flowers. White roses, not red. Cassandra remembered telling him once, a lifetime ago, that white roses were her favorite. She was surprised he'd remembered. "You came," he said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "I said I would." Dinner was strange. Not awkward exactly, but careful. They talked about safe topics at first. Industry news, mutual acquaintances, a funny story about one of River Corp's junior analysts. But eventually, inevitably, they circled back to the harder conversations. "I need to know," Cassandra said, setting down her wine glass. "When did you realize you'd made a mistake? Was it when I filed for divorce? When Lila left? When you saw what I'd built?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Honestly, the coffee shop. When I told you that you were nothing without me, and you looked at me like I was a stranger, because in that moment, I saw myself through your eyes, and I was disgusted by what I saw." "But you still went through with marrying Lila." "I did, because I was a coward who couldn't admit I destroyed the best thing in my life." He met her eyes. "I spent 2 years in a marriage where I repeated every mistake I'd made with you, only this time I couldn't pretend I didn't know better. Lila didn't deserve that. You didn't deserve it. And when she finally left, I realized I'd spent 5 years with you and 2 years with her, treating them both like accessories to my life instead of partners in it." "What changed?" "You walked into that boardroom and bought my company," Nathan said with a wry smile. "You sat across from me with all the power, all the control, and you didn't gloat, you didn't humiliate me, you just did the work, fixed what was broken, made the company better, and I watched you and thought, this is who she always was. I just never bothered to look." Cassandra felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of anger she'd been carrying for 3 years. "I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't feel good, knowing you regret it, knowing you see me now." "You'd be inhuman if it didn't," Nathan acknowledged. "I deserve every bit of satisfaction you feel." But here's what I realized. Revenge is exhausting. I spent 3 years building companies and taking over boards, and yes, part of it was to prove you wrong, but somewhere along the way, I started doing it for me, because I loved the challenge, because I was good at it, because I wanted to see what I was capable of. "And," Nathan prompted gently, "and I'm capable of a lot more than I ever imagined, including forgiving you. Eventually. Maybe." She smiled slightly. "But Nathan, if we do this, if we try to build something new, it can't be based on nostalgia for who we used to be. It has to be based on who we are now." "I know, and I like who you are now. Strong, brilliant, someone who calls me out when I'm being an idiot, someone who doesn't need me but might choose me anyway. They talked until the restaurant was closing, until the waiters were stacking chairs and giving them pointed looks. When they finally left, Nathan walked Cassandra to her car. Not the modest sedan she'd driven 3 years ago, but a sleek Mercedes she'd bought herself with her first big bonus from Titan AI. "Can I see you again?" Nathan asked. "Not for business, just this." Cassandra unlocked her car, then turned back to him. "One more question. If I hadn't become successful, if I'd stayed working at that coffee shop, if I'd never built Titan AI or bought River Corp, would you still want this?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "I'd like to think so, but honestly, I don't know if I would have had the courage to face what I'd done without seeing what you became. So maybe I needed you to become this person before I could appreciate who you always were." Is that the answer you wanted?
"No," Cassandra said, "but it's an honest one, and that's worth something." She kissed him on the cheek, brief, light, full of possibility, and got in her car. As she drove away, she watched him in the rearview mirror standing in the parking lot with his hands in his pockets, looking both hopeful and terrified. Good, she thought. Good, she thought. Let him be terrified. Let him work for this. Let him prove every single day that he's different, that he sees her, that he won't take her for granted ever again. Because Cassandra Mitchell had learned something over the past 3 years. She didn't need anyone to complete her. She was already complete. But maybe, just maybe, she could choose to share her completeness with someone who'd finally learned to appreciate it. 3 months later, River Corp and Titan AI announced a strategic partnership that sent both stock prices soaring. 6 months after that, industry insiders started whispering about the CEO and the chair who'd once been married, divorced, and now seemed to be cautiously, carefully building something new. And a year after that dinner, when Nathan Rivera proposed to Cassandra Mitchell for the second time, he did it right. Not in front of a boardroom or at a fancy restaurant, but in the coffee shop where she'd worked, where she'd found her strength, where she'd first started building her empire. He got down on one knee in front of customers and baristas, holding a ring that Cassandra had designed herself, because this time everything was her choice, and said simply, "I don't deserve you. I know that, but if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day becoming someone who does. Not your husband, your partner, your equal, your biggest supporter. Will you marry me?" Cassandra looked down at him, this man who'd broken her heart and inadvertently given her the freedom to find herself. She thought about the girl she'd been, so eager to please, so desperate to be loved. She thought about the woman she'd become, who'd built empires and conquered industries and learned that her worth wasn't dependent on anyone's approval. And she thought about the future, not the one she'd planned, but the one she was choosing. "Yes," she said, "but if you ever make me feel small again, I will buy your company again, and this time, I'll fire you." Nathan laughed, tears in his eyes, and slid the ring onto her finger. Deal. As the coffee shop erupted in applause, Cassandra realized something. Revenge had gotten her here, but it wasn't what would carry her forward. What would carry her forward was knowing exactly who she was, what she was worth, and what she deserved. Everything else was just details. And if those details included giving a second chance to someone who'd finally learned to deserve it, well, that was her choice to make. And this time, she was making it from a place of strength, not weakness, from abundance, not scarcity, from power, not desperation. The girl who'd stood in that hallway 3 years ago, listening to her husband plan a proposal for another woman, wouldn't recognize the woman she'd become. But Cassandra liked to think she'd be proud, because that girl had walked away with nothing but her dignity, and she turned it into everything.